Welcome to our third Spring Women's Leadership Forum titled Perspectives on Women's Leadership from Prominent Utah Women of Faith. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, Founding Director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project and also the Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. And I'm the host and will be the panel moderator tonight. This event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. We serve Utah and its residents by first, producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. Second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And third, convening trainings and events like this one this evening that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. So I'd like to thank our sponsors as well, the Utah Education Network, UEN, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, and USU Extension for making this event possible. So for those joining tonight, you're welcome to put questions into the chat in Zoom throughout the presentation. We have a Q&A as well, so you can use either one of those. And our panelists will answer as they can. We'll stop a few times during my questions and we'll have some time at the end. So I'll be watching it and some of the panelists may as well. And we'll pose questions, like I said, throughout or at the end. So what I'd like to do is introduce our four panelists, but I'm going to introduce one at a time. And so we have a bit of a break between the bios that I'm going to read. I shortened the bios a little bit, but you can get the full length ones on our Eventbrite and on our website as well. So I'll introduce each one and then give them a couple minutes to answer our first question, and then we'll walk through and I'll introduce you to all four. So again, welcome. Excited to have you listening in tonight. So we'll start with the Reverend Lynn Miller Jackson. She has been in the ministry with the Mountain Sky Conference of the United Methodist Church since 2014. In her initial appointment, Pastor Lynn became the first female senior pastor of Scott United Methodist Church in Denver, Colorado. In 2019, Pastor Lynn became the first African-American and first female senior pastor of Hilltop United Methodist Church in Sandy, Utah. She continues to seek and support many partnerships and serves on many boards and coalitions and committees locally and nationally. Prior to her ministry, Pastor Lynn had a successful career in commercial property management. Pastor Lynn is married to Mark Jackson and share a blended family of 5 adult children, 4 grandchildren, and a dog named Griffin. She earned a bachelor's of art degree in economics and mathematics and a master's of divinity. Welcome, Lynn. I would love to have you answer the first question. It's a 2-part question. Why are you passionate about the topic of women in leadership? And how does women's leadership emerge or play out within your own faith tradition?
Well, Susan, thank you for inviting me. It's such an honor to be here. To the question, why am I passionate about women and leadership? Well, because I'm a woman and a leader. But because women have been so limited by patriarchal ideologies and structures that continue today. So I'm passionate about pushing through the ceilings that exist, the walls that are still up, the doors that are still closed, because women have such great capacity. Such great capacity for empathy as well as accountability. The balance between compassion and critical thinking. So I'm interested in helping people to flourish so that they might become the wonder that is their true self, and not what has been projected upon them or impressed upon them, but what could emerge from within them.
I love that.
I think that's really, really important, especially for women and girls.
Yeah.
Within my faith tradition, how does leadership emerge? Well, I think it's growing in the United Methodist Church slowly. I mean, we're still in a patriarchal structure. And I think we actually crested the point where we've got, perhaps 51% ordained women to men. but that is not a statistic that really speaks to where the power dynamic really lies, or where the power is. It's still held predominantly by men. When we think about the largest churches in the denomination still being led by men. So I think that women's leadership in the United Methodist Church is growing. Our influence is growing. We do have lots of female bishops now, but we got a ways to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So we'll move on to the next one. President Camille Johnson is the 14th General President of the Primary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She was born in Pocatello, Idaho, and married Douglas Johnson in 1987 in the Salt Lake Temple. And they raised their family in Salt Lake City and have 3 sons and 5 grandchildren. Lots of grandchildren in this group thus far. She graduated from the University of Utah in English, and then from the University of Utah S.J. Quinney's College of Law in 1989. And she practiced law for nearly 30 years at a Salt Lake City law firm where she served in the firm leadership, including as the firm's president. Camille and her husband served as mission leaders for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Peru from 2016 to 2019. Welcome, Camille. Thanks for joining us today. I'd love to pose those same questions. Why are you passionate about the topic of women's leadership, and some thoughts about how that plays out in terms of teachings or opportunities within your faith tradition?
Well, like Lynn, I think I'm passionate about it because I'm a woman. And I do think that women shape the future. Society relies upon us largely to teach children. And I think we do have a divine endowment to express love and a capacity to express love and to recognize the needs of those around us. So women's voices are important, and women's leadership is important. And in our faith, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we do give our young people an opportunity to lead. When our young girls are beginning at age 11 and through their young womanhood years until they're 18, they're organized into classes and have class presidencies. So there is a president and 2 counselors and a secretary for each of those groups. Those young women learn to work together in administrative ways, but also they minister to one another. And so we think that in that way, they develop those key leadership skills, compassion, improved communication, the ability to train others, work together as a team. And even if they're not called to that specific assignment, I hope that they recognize that they can lead by their example. And that's something I hope that we're teaching well, because oftentimes we think leadership has to be associated with a formal title. There has to be something next to your name to be a leader. And I don't believe that's the case. Women can lead out even if they don't have a formal responsibility, but we lead all the time by virtue of our example. And of course, in our faith tradition, there are a number of our young people who serve as missionaries. Our 19-year-old young women have the opportunity to serve if they choose. And Susan has done some marvelous research on the qualities that our missionaries develop, leadership qualities that are developed during those years. Confidence, compassion. Some of them learn a new language, but more importantly than the new language, they learn how to communicate and recognize the needs of those around them. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Communication is so key in leadership, so many elements of that. Thank you so much for joining us today and responding to that question. Luna Banuri, I hope I got that right, Luna. Luna Banuri, Executive Director of the Utah Muslim Civic League, is a seasoned consultant with 25 years experience in nonprofit and for-profit sectors in both strategy and community and organizational development. She has been recognized for advocating and fostering social justice policies based on diversity and inclusion. Her legal education and expertise evolved into a distinguished consulting practice for organizations such as UNICEF and the World Bank. And she was appointed to the mayor of Salt Lake City's Human Rights Commission in 2018 and to the governor's Utah, the governors of Utah's Martin Luther King Commission on Human Rights in 2019. She is the founder and director of the nonprofit enterprise that utilizes technology, innovative approaches, and partnerships to solve the toughest global development challenges in education in her native country of Pakistan. So with everything she does, her greatest passion remains her 3 children who are currently pursuing college degrees outside of Utah. You know, we love our children, but sometimes it's nice when they're in college and pursuing degrees. I shouldn't have said that, but yeah, for me, it's kind of nice. My house magically stays clean, by the way, with my kids' house. So Luna, welcome. I would love to have you answer those questions as well.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to Lynn and Camille for their answers to this question. I think mine is a very basic instinct of being a woman and wanting to be seen, heard, and understood is why I'm passionate about leadership in our communities, especially for women of color, women who identify with different minority faiths in the state of Utah. As a Muslim leader, my feminism means daily affirming the full humanity and capabilities of women as parts of God's beloved creation and their sacred work. And in terms of my faith playing a role, as a child, I grew up hearing stories in my grandmother's lap about various religious legacies that exist all around us. And that included stories such as the first wife of Prophet Muhammad, who we refer to as Hazrat Khadija. She was a woman in her 40s, a successful, independent woman, and she is the one who actually proposed to the Prophet, who was at that time in his 20s. And she then became his first wife, and she was his confidant. She was his lead into everything. And then the story of Hagar, who we consider as the mother of all faiths in that way. And through my life, I also realized that when I look at my faith, the Quran speaks about the women's stories in a way, whenever it's trying to refer to feelings. Whenever it's trying to talk about lessons that need to be learned throughout the world. And, several of these female figures that are highlighted have qualities, as their sincerity of their worship, their conviction, their courage, their degrees of closeness to God, and they're singled out for their mention and serve as examples, sometimes positives and sometimes negative, and their stories help us inculcate those virtues. And so through these sort of unexpected Quranic figures, I've to come to see and appreciate the nuances about the depiction of women in any faith tradition. And I've also come to see that Quran or book of faith often engage with affairs of direct importance for women in a female-centric manner, even when certain figures have been pronounced as character flaws. In their breaches, whether slight or grave, in their magnanimity, women figures serve as a reminder of how to navigate human struggles and to develop moral character. And that reading and understanding this has deepened my appreciation of the ways in which the speech of God, the most wise and the subtle, can comfort the heart of seekers of knowledge and piety. And this is how I'm constantly evolving, viewing my position of privilege or my position in the community and in everything else to draw strength and to be able to move forward in being an example for anybody, especially the young folks in the community. That's a very short answer of the long thought process that this question put me through.
I know. It's a big question. Plus I call it one question. It really was two, right? So thank you so much for that. Reverend Berget Weir is an ordained pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and currently serves the congregation of Our Savior's Lutheran Church in Holiday, Utah. She holds a bachelor's degree in education and a master's of divinity. Before her call into the ordained ministry, she was an early childhood professional as well as a social worker. During these years, she founded an early childhood educational program, a faith resource website, and a worshiping community for people with cognitive disabilities and their families. And she served on a variety of community boards and committees in various states, such as an interfaith community advocacy group in Colorado, Holiday Interfaith Council, Family Promise Salt Lake, United Today, Stronger Tomorrow, to name a few. She's also an avid distance runner, loves hiking, the gorgeous Utah terrain with her husband, Mike, and the challenges of puzzles. She and her spouse have 2 grown children. It sounds like many of us have grown children. So I would love to have you, Brigette, answer those questions as well.
Yeah, well, again, thank you for inviting me to this esteemed panel. So it's a joy to be with all of you tonight. Yeah, I mean, to echo what my friends here have already said, women in leadership matter because I am a woman who is a leader. And one of the things I learned early on why women in leadership matter is you can't be what you can't see. And so in order for us to raise up girls and women to live out their leadership potential, we have to be bold and courageous to do that as well, and to do that together and to lift one another up. In my faith tradition, we've been ordaining women for about 50 years, a little over 50 years. And to echo what Lynn said, the ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, has some similar statistics that we are not quite 50-50 parity with women in the pulpit in church leadership. However, there are very few women that pastor large congregations, and we are at about 1/3 of our bishops are female at this point. So we are still trying to figure out what does parity look like. And I think some of the challenge why we have to have this conversation among ourselves and within our denominations is that women have always been leaders. We have always been leaders, but has our voice been heard, and has our leadership been acknowledged? And have those stories been told? And that's what we're doing tonight. We're telling the stories of women and leadership. And much like they're throughout the Quran, they are throughout the Bible. And what's interesting is many of those stories do not get told on a Sunday morning, because we follow what's called a lectionary, where certain texts are picked. And so unless you choose to tell those stories, those tend to be stories that they don't hear. Stories of Hagar and Sarah and Deborah and Ruth and Esther and Mary Magdalene and Lydia and Phoebe, right? The list goes on and on. There are hundreds of women in the Bible who are leaders, still waiting for their voices to be heard. So that is the opportunity that is before us. And that's what informs my leadership, is I use my voice to amplify the voices of other women leaders and our young women leaders. We have some phenomenal young women in the coming generations. I don't know if you've noticed that, but these women are sharp, they are articulate, and they are bold about changing the world and using their gifts, and I think women do bring a unique perspective and voice to the table that is very much needed in our world.
I love that. Thanks so much to all of you. That was my biggest question for each of you. We'll go a little quicker now and just have you throw out some comments. But my first question is, and I talk about this quite often in the work that I do, is why is women's voices, like right now in 2022, I think things have changed during the pandemic. I think we're in a different world right now. Like today, when we talk about that, just today, why do you think it's really even more important? I mean, I'm assuming you agree with me, but I think it's even more important in 2022. But any thoughts from any of you about that? Camille or Luna, do you want to jump in? Any thoughts?
Well, I guess I circle back to something I said at the beginning. I think women have a unique capacity to recognize the needs of others. And I think that they do have this, I refer to it as a divine endowment, this ability to express love and to recognize the needs of others. Is there ever been a time when we needed that more? And
Truly.
so women's voices in leadership are important for us to find solutions to help heal.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you know the research, Camille, that it's quite clear in the research that women actually pay more attention to nonverbals, things that are happening, you know, in the heart and in the mind, and recognizing that helps us as leaders. I love it. Who else would like to jump in? Lynn, I saw you unmute for a minute.
Well, I was thinking that as we were engaging in the diversity, equity, and inclusion dialogues and taking action, we have to have women leadership, those voices, not just at the table, but vocal. And, you know, I think that during the pandemic, as we think about, I think it became clear when everybody was at home, the importance of what goes on in the household. And my thought went to, you know, the fact that stay-at-home moms are still considered not to have a job.
True.
You know, when the people who are the stay-at-home moms, that's one of the hardest jobs in the world. And that is a nurturing role that isn't only important in the home, it translates into the workplace. I mean, the soft skills that are being nurtured, as well as the hard practical skills that women impart, but don't get acknowledged, don't get recognized as being the ones who are ushering that into the next generations.
That is
Yes.
so important. And I have had women through the years, particularly in my faith, come up and said, I want to be a leader and I haven't. And I'm like, don't you have 4 teenagers in your home right now? Like, is that the epitome of leadership, influencing towards a goal? And there's not recognition sometimes from themselves, don't you think, Lynn? But from other people as well.
Yeah, I tell moms that if you're a mom, you're a master of management. There's your degree.
I love that. Brigette, you're unmuted. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, well, just to kind of what Lynn is saying, we tend, when those feminized roles, feminized skills are not valued in our society, right? And so starting to value them is how we start to bring those voices and those skills to bear in the greater world. And I think that that's part of our challenge. I was an early childhood educator before becoming a pastor. And so, you know, oh, you play with kids all day. No, I'm developing leaders all day long, right? We're developing language, we're developing empathy, we're developing, you know, all kinds of skills. And I think that when we can start to, as a society, have a conversation about the value of those skills, I think we will start to see more women in considered leaders. And I think that's a bonus for our society as a whole.
Great, thanks so much. Luna, did you have a quick comment before we move forward?
I do.
Yeah.
I think the inclusion of women has always been important. I don't think it's only the phenomena. I think it is the understanding that women actually hold that knowledge culture, and that whenever they step out of their spaces in terms of their home or anything, they actually lower the barriers for everybody else around them. Once again, that is the intrinsic nature of the way we work. We build communities. Whatever problem is put in front of us, we bring 2 other people to the table and try to work our way around it. The pandemic has actually just highlighted of how eliminated women are and why there is a new push to bring them on. But I think it is because we've been ignoring them, and our society is literally structured around providing comfort for men in leadership rather than women. And I think they've realized through this pandemic that it's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for those comments. I'm going to shift us over now into a question about you, each of you. And Brigette, I'm going to start with you on this one. And in thinking about your own leader, all of you are prominent women leaders in your faiths and in the community here in Utah and beyond. in thinking about your own leadership development journeys, through even childhood or youth or college or whatever. What were just a couple of the most impactful opportunities or experiences you believed helped prepare you to lead, help you prepare you to use your voice? So I don't want to take too long on this, but if you can just share a few of yours, and then I think I'm going to pause and look at some questions in the chat after we finish this one.
Yeah, thanks. Briefly, this is again where we highlight each other. When I was 14, I had my very first female pastor I had ever seen, and I thought she was a rock star. And she actually, on a pretty prominent day in our faith tradition, she put me in the pulpit and said, "This is, you will speak and you will read the scripture, and you will be in this very prominent space." So again, to be put in the space of leadership helped me to cultivate my own leadership skills.
And how old were you on
I
that
was
one?
14.
14, wow.
14. Yeah. So just to even be invited into that space. And then I had the opportunity throughout in college. I was actually invited into a position of outreach director for a ministry, a campus ministry, by the pastor, who basically said, "I want you to do this. I want you to knock door to door and invite folks to the Lutheran Student Center." This is in Nebraska in the 90s. And then as a young woman, I had a senior pastor. I was at a large congregation, and when I was wanting to start the school, and with no money, no resources, and who supported me and said, "You have these gifts. I will open doors for you, and I will support you and affirm you." So those are some, a couple of examples of, you have to have it's the community. It wasn't just one, it had to be several people helping me recognize qualities I had in myself and helping me build on them.
And those, I call them in my writings, in my research and book, transformational moments, just getting you up at that pulpit. And Camille talked about the young women too, I'm of this same faith as Camille. And I did, when I was 14 and 15, had some of those opportunities too. I organized dances, I organized things. And so I love those examples. Luna, why don't you share a couple from your life?
Absolutely. And my experiences have been very women-centric. I did grow up with a very strong mother who left her village and, literally went to Paris to pursue her doctorate degree. And what I saw growing up was her struggling in a very patriarchal society. I mean, this is a village next to Afghanistan, modern day Afghanistan, where women are still fighting for their rights. And she was so highly educated. But the point that she drove to me every single time was, if she was struggling in her work. So my father passed away when she was very young. And in our faith tradition, there is a 40-day lag time before you can resume your daily activities or your going back to work. And there is a reason for those 40 days. And in case of any pregnancy, any other issues, that you're able to manage your emotions and everything. My mother did not follow that rule and went ahead and joined her office, her work. And the reason she gave me from a faith perspective was that she needed to provide a living for her children, and that she did not want any child to be dependent on any relative or anything. She spoke about praying as a science, of reciting faith scripture and creating these magnetic waves that give you that positivity. She spoke about, the story in the book of Quran, which talks about a nation which mastered the sound, the power of sonic sound. And lately I was in a sound circle, and that reminded me of how all of these things that we today in the modern world are looking for comfort, that they belong in our faith traditions if we look harder. So she made me question and position myself into a specific moral compass. So whatever I do or don't do, I reflect back and say, does this count as something that my faith, my culture, my ancestors would believe in me or would concur? And that basically makes me want to do the right thing always and speak up where it's needed. I think the rest of it, I was pretty vocal, so nobody had to kind of push me around. They had to tell me to sit down quite a few times all along my life. But, those are some of the influences that I remember.
Those hearing, that's so powerful though, hearing those stories of women in the past, of strong women, those examples, those stories, that's such a great insight. I appreciate you sharing that. Camille, I'll jump with you next, and then Lynn, if you could finish us off on that one. These are great.
I was thinking a little bit about some of the experiences I had when I was in my youth, and I did have opportunities to lead then, but thankfully I was blessed by other women who let me fail on occasion. So if I was given an assignment, they let me fulfill it to the best of my ability and didn't pick up all the pieces. So I learned for the next time. And I think that sometimes as adults, we think we can rush in and help them and we can fix everything. And that does them a disservice in terms of them learning those valuable leadership skills of flexibility and adaptability. And so I think I was blessed with opportunities and leaders in my life. And that includes my parents who let me get it wrong sometimes, or not necessarily get it wrong, but maybe just let something fall through the cracks, and they let it fall, right? They didn't run to the store and fix it for me. They just let it fall. And that helped me prepare for the next time. And of course, I mean, in my leadership development, my opportunity to be a mother has certainly been critically important. I agree with you, Lynn. I have a master's in management by virtue of that. And I was, of course, practicing law full time during that same time that I was juggling my children. But I do think that the skills that I learned in managing my home translated to managing a law firm. And I hope people can see that connection, that those skills that women are developing wherever they are at this point are transferable. They're cross-transferable, right? If we're in home, if we're in the workplace, those skills come together.
I just wanted to make a quick comment to Camille and said, I think I actually have a master of making sure my kids fail again and again and again, and not give them anything for granted. Quite literally, you learn the best from your failures.
Yeah.
And society, well, I just want to share one quick thing. This happened, my daughter is now almost 30, but this happened like years and years ago when she was playing soccer and here in Utah. And one time I went to a soccer game and I was sitting by mothers who their entire conversation was about how they didn't want their daughter to run for like student body because there was a prettier girl there and she might win. And we don't want her to fail. And I had just written a book about all this stuff. And finally, I could just hear this over. Finally, I just turned to this group. I don't think they were fans of mine. And just said, I just wrote a book on how powerful it is when you fail and you learn and you get tough. Anyway, don't mean to take too much time, but that was one of my experiences. They looked at me like, whoa, but I couldn't, you can't keep your mouth shut sometimes. It's just really hard. Lynn, I would love to have you respond as well.
For me, this thing of parents letting you fail. My parents and grandparents, now that I think about it, were entrepreneurs. And so one of my greatest opportunities was we had a family business. And when I was 16, my mother entrusted me. She said, I need for you to open the store on Saturday morning. Or no, it was a Sunday morning. She said, I just need a day where I can just sleep in or something. And she gave me that opportunity. And 7 a.m. was the time. And she came into my room and it was 6:45 and I was not up.
Oh, no.
Okay. And my mother fired me on the spot. And she did not mince words. It was, you are done.
Did she rehire you though? any time after that?
Yes, yes.
Oh.
So I learned, I mean, I felt 2 inches tall and learned my lesson. But we would move forward from there. I learned that lesson. And then she would actually entrust that business to me during the summers while I was in college so that she could take a break to go do what made her heart sing. Um, but she could entrust me to actually run that operation without being worried about it. So that trust was a huge lesson for me. But the other thing I want to share is that my parents modeled this certain work ethic.
Mm.
Steady as you go. They weren't concerned about the time commitment, for the work. It was how well are you going to do what it is that you're doing. My dad's motto was do it well or not at all. But as he was dealing with people, he was always encouraging. And so it's my mom's the can-do mom. So you can do it. Oh, you can do it. She still does that today. But my dad would always say, everyone has value. And so as we engage with anyone, that was the mindset. Everyone has value. And so how do we see that value in others and then help them to bring out their value? It is just, those are some of the greatest lessons that I learned.
Thank you. There is a question that kind of goes along with what we've just been talking about. So I'll throw that. Maybe have each of you maybe think of one thing. So this is not on my list of questions. It's coming from the listeners, but that is you all mother, your own children, but mother, right? I call all of us are called to mother in some ways. But what maybe would be one thing that you have done with your kids or others that you have mothered that you feel like provides them with an opportunity to develop leadership? So we've already gotten through failure. So let's try to go someplace else there. Luna, you want to start? I'm putting you on the spot because you didn't have prepared for this one, but can you think of one or anyone else that wants to just unmute if you've got one in mind? Luna?
So your question really is, how did I nurture their leadership?
Yeah, just maybe one thing on how you gave them opportunities or nurtured. I like that.
I think by letting them fail again and again. But I actually am one of those parents who didn't think that leadership was important. For me, gaining knowledge and really embedding in yourself for the search of knowledge was the most important thing where my kids were concerned. So I have really pushed them to push their own boundaries about learning. Just having an attitude where they can. I also have to acknowledge once again that being in Utah, being from being brown, I think my kids did enjoy a certain level of privilege. And it was very easy for them to become the token leaders as youth. And I was acutely aware that if they have a little bit of, leadership skills, that they can get kind of consumed with the idea of that, ooh, I could be a star, or I could just do this. And that early success, I felt, would take away a lot of it away from them to embed themselves. And I think my daughter did resist and did do quite a bit in terms of activism in Utah. She was one of the youth leaders who got a climate change bill approved through the legislature at the age of 16. But I think she did it despite me, not because of me.
Sometimes that's what happens, right? Yeah. None of us are perfect parents. Well, maybe you are, but I know my kids would be the first to say I'm not. Camille, you unmuted, so you have a comment?
I think one of the things we did is we counseled a lot as a family. We didn't call it that because if I'd said we're having family counsel, it wouldn't have been very engaging, but I fed them and then we counseled. And that gave them an opportunity to own what was happening in their life and find solutions for themselves. So this would happen a lot of times on Sunday around a Sunday meal. We talk about what everybody had the following week. and how we could help each other or empower each other to accomplish what was going to be required. And part of this had to do with me just trying to juggle a lot of balls, right? I needed everybody to contribute to the good of the whole. But I think doing that allowed them to take ownership of the things for which they had responsibility, and that taught them to lead.
I agree. Brigette.
Yeah, so much like Luna, kind of it's a meld of Luna and Camille. You know, I have a daughter, she's 25 and my son is 23, and we actually have a third child who passed away at the age of 15 months. So my kid, who was our youngest, so my kids have the perspective of watching me organize our life in a way around a medically fragile child and run a school and be a parent. And what we had the conversation at our house a lot around was your passion. What is your passion? What are you, I love Lynn's quote. She uses this all the time and I'm going to steal it, Lynn, is what makes your heart sing. Because where your passion is and where, you know, when you can live out your passion, you're going to lead. Because that is where you are equipped and gifted and probably where you're needed. So we really pushed our kids for that, and we let them fail. And I was also brought up in the military. So my dad was a colonel in the Air Force. So we were pretty regimented growing up. There was no failure. There was plenty, trust me. But it was a little different in that respect, but there was a lot of ownership, which is what Camille talked about too. You can have passion, but passion without leadership does not equal any kind of success or even fulfillment. When I was a preschool teacher, I used to tell my families at the beginning of every year at that first parent meeting, I would say, I'm here to have your kids be successful and not in the ways of the world. I don't care if they become a doctor or, you know, make money or what, that's fine if they do, that's total, but I want them to be successful and that I want them to thrive and I want them to be whole and I want them to be loving and know that they're part of a community and do what they love. And so that was always my definition of success that I offered parents, and that's how I raised my kids. So that's a little bit about how we went about that at our house.
Thank you. Lynn, do you have comments there, or I can throw you the next question, either way?
Yeah, just a quick comment there. I encourage the kids to follow their passion. And then we supported what they were doing. So coordinating schedules to make certain that we could get people to where they needed to be, and always looking for what other doors or windows were opening, and then kind of stirring curiosity to figure out how we would get something done, and who was needed along the way. And another part of that was having the kids, well, we had the ability to take the kids with us so that they could actually see us do what we do, see us lead. So modeling leadership, and then accountability was important. My motto was, I need to hear it from you. I can deal with what I know about. It's the unknowns that give me challenge. So the accountability was really, really important in raising our kids.
Thank you so much. Great responses. I'm going to actually go back to one of my questions, and then I'm seeing some other great questions in the chat as well. And this one can be very quick, but sometimes we think of women leading just in certain sectors or in certain roles or domains, whatever we want to call it. But you know, where and how do we need women and girls even, right, to lead? You've talked about, Camille talked and Brigette just a minute ago about being leaders in your organizations, and leading kids or leading parents to think about all of those kinds of things in organizations and in church, you know, denominations as well. But yeah, I would love to hear how, you know, where are other places that really today in 2022 need women's voices? So I've lost track of where we're at. Lynn, I'm going to throw it to you to pick up on that one.
I don't think that there is a realm where we don't need women's voices. And one of the things that I've worked in the construction industry as a general contractor. When people see me, it's like, you're a what? you know, um, Even as a pastor, I mean, it's you put on a robe and someone still asks you the question. You're the lead. You're the pastor for the whole church. I love that one.
Yeah.
But I think that we need to see women in all realms, and the women are there, but we need to figure out, how do we get their voices heard, and how do we get them seen, so that young girls and younger women can be inspired to say, hey, yes, we need to see women flying airplanes, and being air traffic controllers and all those other instrumental roles
Yeah.
that are typically male oriented or male dominated.
Yeah. Brigette?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to keep adding to what Lynn says. I think some of that is how we raise our boys.
Mm.
I'm a mother of a daughter and a son, and how we talk to our boys and raise our boys is just as vital about how we raise our girls and talk to our girls about leadership. One of the things I will never forget, again, my dad was an officer in the Air Force, and he's a pretty ardent feminist. He had 2 daughters and a wife, so he had no choice, but in that matter. But I can remember in the mid 80s, him mentoring a female officer, because she was experiencing that patriarchal, the military in the 80s was extremely patriarchal, and it was extremely difficult. And I remember the conversations that they would have where he would say, I'm going to support you, and we're going to make sure your voice is heard. So it's also raising our boys and men to make space.
Yeah.
I mean, this is where it's a communal effort, where we have women in prominent leadership roles. And there is, to echo Lynn, there is nowhere that a woman's voice, is it Ruth Ginsburg that said a woman's voice, wherever decisions are being made, women should be at that table. I think that says it all.
I went a couple years before the pandemic started. Everything for me is like, when was it compared to when the pandemic started? I was in India, and I was doing a keynote at an ashram in India, specifically on the unique research on when women are at the peacekeeping tables of countries. And the United Nations and some other research says that when women their voices are at the treaties, you get more treaties, and the treaties last longer, and on and on and on. So I also want to say, I have a piece coming out in the BYU Quarterly Studies, like this month, that's called, let me see if I can remember, Rise and Run, Good Government, and it relates to Latter-day Saint women. And I've just thrown it out as one thing that we do need more women is running for public office, right? Using their voices in public office, whether that's school boards or city councils or Congress or state legislatures. So I'm putting it out there. I don't know if any others have comments on that. Luna, are you ready to jump in?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with Brigette and Lynn, which I normally do in our work too. But in terms of the faith perspective, right? When I look at Muslim women in US, in America, I do see certain trends through research. So they say that right now, every 8th woman that you would meet across in US would be a Muslim woman. Obviously, that number is lower in Utah, but the average Muslim woman is more educated than the mainstream American right now. And being a lot of them having that immigrant background, they are well entrenched, let's say, in STEM, STEAM, and all those areas. But with this kind of education, and it is almost like last 2 generations, I feel being in public role is important for women from my faith. And we don't have women in faith areas. We don't have female leadership in faith areas. We don't have certified programs, or, there is almost, no mosque leadership led by women, very extremely few. So like, that's one thing that I encourage, that the narrative, the culture around faith spaces will not change or will not evolve if women don't step up. And women in our community remain involved in more service and all those kind of things. But that's my absolute want and request from women from my faith, to step up in public roles, whatever it may be.
If I could jump in on that. So because in the ELCA, we do have women leadership, it does change the conversation. And again, to go back to, it also addresses toxic masculinity, which is harmful to our men and boys and harmful to women in our culture as well. And we can't have those conversations without all the voices at the table. And this is, in my faith tradition, it's all about the healing of all of us, right? We cannot heal on our own. We heal in community, we heal in collaboration. And part of that healing, I loved it, Luna, with your sound circle, right? Those prayers that we together, we can surround ourselves with that healing presence. But I think that's right. We have to have everyone at the table, and it requires in every faith tradition for spaces to be made for women and for women to step up and do that.
And there's so much healing that needs to happen and will continue to with the dynamics today. I'm just every day watching Ukraine and, and what's happening there, and creating more situations where there's more of a need to heal. And we have, as women, so many wonderful, not every woman's the same, not all of us are the same, but we are. The research tells us we're more nurturing generally. I've had men that are really nurturing too, but we are. Camille.
Susan, I just wanted to add one point to this discussion about why women's voices are necessary everywhere. And I think it's because women are especially astute at giving voice to the voiceless. So by way of example, who represents the voice of children? It's typically women that will do that. And so our children's interests recognized, typically, not always, but typically not without the voice of women. So just another reason.
Actually, that you bring up a good point, because I talk about it quite often. There's research that absolutely says that states with more women in their state legislatures actually allocate money differently than states. There's more money to education. There's more money to healthcare initiatives, more money to children, families. So what you're saying is right on. And social programs like homelessness and poverty and so forth. And so these are things, even though this last legislative session, I think there's been some good movement, but we still are low with women in our state legislature. And so I'm a voice to encourage that. Let's shift now to, and I'm looking at the time and it's moving along. This is such a great discussion. I love it. Let's see. Let me go to one in the chat. Unless, are any of you looking in the chat? Do you have one that intrigues you that you want to jump in? We don't need all four of you to respond to anything. There's one, I'll just put it out there and maybe have one or two of you respond. But someone asked, how have you helped daughters, or I would say even young women in your faith, work through and deal with the stereotypes that often, just like women not being in STEM fields, or women need to be in the background for leadership and not out using their voices in the forefront. So how have you done that? Do you have activities? Do you have, anyone want to comment? Let's just have maybe a couple of them and then we'll shift to something else. Oh, I'm not seeing any. Oh, Lynn, thank you.
Being my presence.
Oh, true.
Done that. And then also inviting those young voices in the pulpit And I don't care how young. I mean, I've worked with kids as young as 6 or 7 to give them speaking roles to let them know, yes, you can do this. I have, economics and mathematics. That, I'm kind of a STEM background person, and I bring that language into even the pulpit just to kind of stir different types of thinking that, yeah, there's so many different possibilities. If I learn what your interest is, then I will take an interest in your interest so that we can have conversation and then think about what the possibilities are for you. And if I can support, then yes. So.
And being really aware of making sure we give opportunities for boys and girls, right? And young men and young women in more equal numbers to do that. And maybe one more of you want to jump on that? Then
I think visibility, as Lynn says, is one of the most important part, at least once again for me. Once again, we don't have any female faith leaders in this state, very, very few. And, having these spaces, safe spaces to be able to talk about them and not have always be seen or have religious symbols to protect ourselves, and letting women around us, the young women, hear us and see us. That itself, I think, is one of the first things that become pivotal in them getting comfortable in their skin to come and move forward. We in our programming, once again, I have this unsaid rule in my brain, whatever fellowship, scholarship, internships that I offer, 50% to women. So I try really hard to implement that. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. But once they're with them, making them comfortable, giving them that importance, giving them that confidence, all of it together, small seeds.
thank you so much. Yeah, if any of you see a question that you'd like to jump on, just feel free to let me know. I'm trying to, let me just look, I'm just looking at you to see if anybody's jumping in before I do it. We're not going to have time to get to all of my questions, but let me just ask this, and maybe a couple others can jump in on this. Have you seen, or do you believe that top level conversations change when we've kind of inferred that when women are at the table? Yeah, anyone want to respond? Is there an example that you want to share? Brigette?
Yeah, so in 2016, the ELCA elected our first female presiding bishop for the whole nation, and for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And I can tell you that even the topics of, yeah, it's very exciting, right? We call that breaking the stained glass ceiling in our tradition. And, what's very exciting is even what was discussed changed. It wasn't even just the how, but it moved towards more conversation around inclusion and diversity and equity. The conversation, and when there's conflict, it is dealt with far more transparency than we've had in the past. And now that has also been painful because that's some transparency that particularly our denomination isn't used to. So there's some growth edges to that too, that just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth it. But yeah, we have seen that as a denomination. And once we had the first female presiding bishop, the number of synodical bishops, which is our whole political structure. You can look that up if you're interested, but it's not that interesting. But anyway, we have 65 synodical bishops, and the number of women went from like 9 to, I think we're in the 30s now. So just again, visibility and the topic of conversation itself changed.
I love that. And Camille, I'm going to put you on the spot because one of the things, we're of the same faith tradition. And one of the things that I've seen some what I feel progress in is that women have been included, and I'm sure you sit on some of those more the last 3 or 4 years or 5, I don't know how long, with committees where maybe there were just men and some women's voices at those top levels have been brought in. I don't know if you want to respond to that or have other
Oh,
thoughts.
I'm happy to address that. I do sit on executive councils here at the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's committees. Committees tend to be those thinking groups that feed information to councils, and women are sitting on those councils and play a critical role. My assignment, my present responsibilities came to me just a year ago. And I have to tell you about, in my first few council meetings, I expected that I'd sit back a little bit and observe and then figure out what role I would play. And I wasn't given the opportunity to do that. I was asked on the very first day, in the very first meeting, what do you think?
Oh,
What changes can we make? What difference can we make? And so I feel like my voice has absolutely positively been requested and heard. And thank you for giving me the chance to share that.
yeah. Any other comments on that? All right, I'm looking over into the chat again. We've got some great questions. We won't be able to hit them all, but I'm looking at the one that's, unless any of you can boycott what I'm saying, but I'll just give you the next one that really intrigues me. What have you done to help girls, and this is in your faith leadership roles, help girls and women develop their individual access to sacredness, divine goodness in their personal faith development, and which then they can bring to enhance the community? That's a lovely question. I'm just going to call it lovely. That's just a wonderful question. I've lost track of who's talked and who's, so Brigette,
I answered Georgia in the chat because I wasn't sure if we would get to that and I didn't want to lose it. So I'll just highlight it. What I said is I loved that question as well.
Yeah.
And what I said is, for me, we highlight that we are all, capital ALL, created in God's divine image, right? I actually wrote a blog post a couple of years ago that was, does God wear dangly earrings, right? That if I'm created in God's image, then there's a part of God that is feminine. There's a part of God that loves lipstick and high heels and dangly earrings. And that as women, we have inherent sacredness as well. We are filled with the divine as created in God's very divinity and in God's image. So that's a little bit, what I talk about, and how that it's truly allowing us to see ourselves as love and be loved.
I love that.
So
excellent.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. So one more person want to jump in? I'm watching you unmute or mute I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but I think that's such a wonderful question. Or do you, Lynn?
I agree with Brigette, and really making certain that women and girls understand their sacred worth, and not always referring to God as he, because God is more than he. So yeah, that's a part of it. And then also reading scripture and looking at it from the feminine lens brings a very different perspective to scripture and how we can see ourselves in the biblical corpus, and how it's an ongoing story, this epic story that keeps going on.
And I've done a lot of studying and recent thinking and writing on identity and how important it is for girls to see themselves in God, or in our religion. We talk sometimes and sing about a mother in heaven, but that identity is so important. I'm going to shift to our last two questions. We're almost out of time, so I want this one to be, don't you love how I hint? This one to be super quick. And that is, what would be maybe 2 quick recommendations for each of you on some ways that girls and young women can prepare to be leaders in your faith traditions or otherwise. around. So Camille, why don't you jump in first?
Yeah, and this just plays off of the discussion we just had about them understanding their divine identity. And the next step them is for them to understand that they have a divine purpose. And as they understand that purpose, it's empowering, right? To live, we say, live the gospel of Jesus Christ, care for those in need. We invite others, and then we unite families. This is how we express it. In our faith tradition, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, children and adults are all engaged in that same work. And that's our purpose. And so I think adding to what you've already expressed about divine identity, understanding a divine purpose is really empowering.
Awesome. Thank you. Luna, why don't you jump in next, and then Lynn and Brigette.
For me, it's to be open to those who have different views or lifestyles. Then you respect their individuality and perspective, and they'll make your life richer.
Thank you.
Be curious and connect with all generations.
Yeah, those are really short. I love them. Very profound. Brigette.
Yeah, I think adding to the wisdom of my sisters here, it would be to create space for them to lead, to make sure that they understand that no matter what age, they are empowered and have something to say and something to add.
Yeah, I love that. You know, as we've come out of, the last number of decades, 50s, 60s, 70s, there really has, and 80s, and continues, there really is this teaching or this culture of men do this, they're the public faces, and women are behind the scenes. And I think we still see that, and being able to, help girls find opportunities and get counsel, and to even start by using their voices in different settings is so critical. I'd like to finish out now, and some of you gave some advice there, but I'm going to give each of you just like 45 seconds to a minute to give your what are some of your final thoughts or words of wisdom to finish us up today. So Lynn, I'll have you start.
No pressure there.
Profound, very profound, Lynn.
I would say we are in a time when we need to recalibrate the concept of leadership. So don't be resigned to accept what is. Continue to imagine, stir your imagination about the possibilities of what can be and what you can bring to the world. Stay in that zone.
Thank you so much. Brigette.
Yeah, I think this is a crucible moment. We're at an inflection point in our society, and it is important for all voices to come to the table. And it is also in leadership, we need to think about who is being left behind in society. And we also need to understand we are interconnected. I think the future of leadership is collaboration and interconnectivity, and understanding that is not just between humans, but it's also with our environment. I think that's a piece of leadership that we neglect, is that environments in leadership matter. Humans can certainly create environment, but there's also environments that are given to us by God. And we function within that environment in a certain way. And so it's part of leadership is knowing where you are in that overall environment.
Thank you so much. Camille.
Well, I think all of us are in a position to give young women voice, give them an opportunity to express their voice and to gain confidence in expressing their voice. And so I guess that's my parting thought. Let's take advantage of the opportunities we have to give them an opportunity to lead, and sometimes fail, and not pick up the things that fall between the cracks, right? But support them, wrap our arms around them, helping them understand their divine nature and their divine purpose.
And what I love from some research, what you just said, Camille, and some research I've done through the years, is how impactful that is for parents to do with their own children, for leaders of faith like all of you to do with people, but also neighbors. A neighbor can reach out to another child in their neighborhood or a young woman, the village, right? It takes a village. Don't you think more and more it really does take a village, even more than past decades, to raise kids and to produce leaders? Luna, I'll give you the last voice here to share your thoughts.
I'm actually going to be very precise. For me, the ask is the way each one of you embody love and each one of you embody mercy. If we can, as sisterhood, continue to do so for all of our communities together and on our own, I think the world can become perfect.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all four of our panelists here. This was such a wonderful conversation. I love these conversations, so appreciate that. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Utah Education Network, John M. Huntsman School of Business, and USU Extension for making this event possible. So thanks to each of you for joining us today, the panelists, as well as each of you joining us for this webinar. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.